Emily Parker sat in a small rented room with peeling paint and a leaky ceiling. The rain outside made soft tapping sounds on the window. She watched the gray sky and held her son Ben close. He was 8 years old, full of questions and hope, even though life had not been kind to them. For years, Emily had worked at a bakery in town, waking up before sunrise to bake bread and pack boxes. She never complained, but the rent kept rising and her savings kept shrinking. Every time she paid bills, she whispered a promise to herself that one day they would have a home of their own. One evening after work, Emily scrolled through old property listings on her worn-out phone. Most of them were far too expensive. She almost gave up. But then she saw something strange. It was a listing for an abandoned farm 40 miles away, priced at only $400. She read it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. The photo showed a small wooden house surrounded by tall grass and broken fences. The description said, "Abandoned property. Needs full repair. Sold as is." She stared at it for a long time. The next morning, Emily went to the town office to ask about it. The clerk behind the counter was an older man with gray hair and glasses. He looked surprised when she mentioned the property. "That old farm," he said. "No one wants it. The soil is dry and the roof has holes. It's just dirt, Emily. You'd be wasting your money." But Emily smiled politely and asked to see the papers anyway. Something about that place called to her. Maybe it was the quiet in the picture, or maybe it was the thought of giving Ben a home that belonged to them. She signed the papers that same day. $400 was almost all she had left, but she didn't hesitate. When she handed the money to the clerk, he sighed and said again, "It's just dirt?" "Emily," she only replied, "then we'll make something grow from it." That weekend, she and Ben packed their few belongings into an old blue car that coughed every time it started. They drove through winding roads and empty fields until they reached the edge of the property. The wooden fence was half fallen, the gate hung by one hinge, and the weeds were taller than Ben. But to Emily, it looked like a blank page waiting for a new story. Ben jumped out of the car and ran toward the barn, laughing as he disappeared behind the tall grass. The sound of his laughter filled the empty air. Emily stood in front of the farmhouse, looking at the chipped paint and broken porch. The windows were cloudy and part of the roof had caved in, but she didn't feel discouraged. She imagined it clean and warm, with curtains in the windows and flowers by the steps. Inside, the rooms were dusty, and the floorboards creaked under her feet. Spiderwebs hung from the corners and old furniture sat covered in white sheets. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans and opened the back door. A soft breeze carried the smell of earth and wildflowers. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of peace. They spent the next few days cleaning and fixing what they could. Emily used nails and wooden boards she found in the barn to patch the porch. Ben helped by sweeping and collecting old bottles and rusty tools. At night, they slept on sleeping bags in the living room and listened to the wind outside. The stars above were brighter than any city lights they had ever seen. On the fourth day, Emily went into town to buy supplies. She met a few locals at the hardware store who looked at her with curiosity. One man said, "You bought that old farm? People say nothing grows there anymore." She only smiled and replied, "Then maybe it's time to prove them wrong." When she returned, Ben was waiting with a handful of small stones. "Mom, look what I found," he said, holding them out proudly. They were dull gray but had a faint sparkle when the sunlight hit them. Emily laughed gently and said, "Pretty but not worth much. Let's keep them by the porch." Ben placed them in a small tin can and set it on the steps. As days passed, Emily worked from morning until evening. She planted vegetables in the dry soil, repaired broken windows, and painted the front door white. Every evening, she and Ben sat on the porch with sandwiches and sweet tea. They watched the sun sink behind the hills and talked about what the farm could become. Sometimes they imagined having a few chickens or maybe a cow. Ben liked to dream about building a treehouse once the old oak in the yard was strong again. Life was simple, but it felt full of purpose. Emily began to notice how different the air smelled here, cleaner, fresher, filled with the scent of grass and wood smoke. She also noticed something else. The soil, though dry on top, was strange underneath. When she dug small holes for planting, she often found small, shiny pieces mixed with the dirt. They were like the ones Ben had found earlier. She didn't think much of it, but she kept a few just because they looked beautiful when washed. Every night before bed, Emily wrote in a small notebook, She listed everything she needed to fix: the roof, the fence, the well. But she also wrote little things that made her smile, like Ben's laughter when the wind blows the grass, or the quiet sound of crickets after sunset. One morning, she woke up to a soft knocking on the door. It was Mrs. Turner, an elderly woman from town. She brought a basket of bread and jam. "Heard someone moved in at the old place," she said kindly. "I used to know the man who owned it. He dug all over that land looking for something. Never found it, though." Emily thanked her and smiled, not paying much attention to the words. Later that afternoon, as Emily dug near the porch to plant flowers, her shovel hit something hard. She knelt down and brushed the soil away with her hands. Beneath the dirt was a layer of rough stones, some of which glimmered faintly in the sunlight. She picked one up, wiped it on her sleeve, and turned it over in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. She thought it was quartz and tossed it aside gently. Ben came running from the barn carrying a wooden crate he had found. "Mom, this place is full of surprises," he said with a grin. Emily laughed and nodded. "It sure is, Ben. It just needs a little love." That night, the sky was clear. The moonlight spread across the fields, turning them silver. Emily stood on the porch with a cup of tea in her hands, watching the land that everyone had called worthless. The old man's words echoed in her mind. "It's just dirt, Emily." She smiled softly, thinking how wrong he might be. She didn't know what the land held beneath, but she felt something deep inside her heart, a quiet certainty that this place was meant to be theirs. As the wind moved through the fields and the stars shone brighter, Emily whispered a promise to herself. She would make this forgotten farm come alive again. No matter how hard it was, she would build a home here for her son and for their future. And somewhere under that same soil where she had planted her first seeds, something precious waited to be found. The days on the old farm began to blend into a peaceful rhythm. Emily woke up every morning before the sun rose, boiled water for tea, and looked out at the golden light spilling across the fields. The air was cool, and the smell of wet grass drifted through the open window. Ben would still be asleep under the blanket on the couch, his hair messy and his small hands tucked under his chin. The quiet moments before the day began were Emily's favorite. They reminded her that she had done the right thing by coming here. The house was slowly becoming a home. The porch had a new coat of paint, the windows were clean, and the kitchen smelled of bread every evening. Emily had even planted a few rows of vegetables behind the barn. The soil was stubborn at first, dry and full of rocks, but she refused to give up. Each seed she planted felt like a promise. One morning, while working near the garden, Emily noticed something shiny in the dirt. It was a small gray stone, round and smooth, and it glimmered faintly under the sunlight. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm. It looked similar to the ones Ben had found earlier. Curious, she pocketed it and went back to digging. By noon, she had found 3 more. Each one looked a little different but shared the same faint sparkle. When Ben came running outside after breakfast, she showed him the stones. His eyes widened. "More of them," he said excitedly. "Do you think they're treasure?" Emily smiled and said, "Maybe they're just pretty rocks, but we can keep them." She placed them beside the tin can where Ben had stored the first ones. It was now half full and sat on the porch railing, catching the afternoon light. The next few days brought more discoveries. Every time Emily tilled the soil or dug a new patch for vegetables, she found more of the shiny stones. Sometimes she would uncover 10 or 15 in a single morning. They were never very large, but their glimmer was unusual. The light seemed to stay inside them even when the sun went down. Emily didn't think too much about it at first. The land was old, and she guessed that minerals in the soil might make the stones sparkle. Still, she found herself collecting them. She washed them in a bucket of water and lined them up along the porch rail. At night, when the moonlight touched them, they looked like tiny stars scattered across the wood. Ben became fascinated by them. He started digging small holes near the well, pretending to be a treasure hunter. Every time he found one, he ran to Emily shouting, "Look, another one." She would laugh, brush the dirt from his hands, and tell him he was her best helper. The laughter between them made the old farm feel alive again. One afternoon, while Ben was playing by the barn, Emily decided to visit the local market. She sold a few baskets of fresh vegetables she had grown and bought flour, soap, and a small lamp for the kitchen. At the market, she met Mrs. Turner again, the kind woman who had brought bread on their first week. The older lady asked about the farm, and Emily told her how things were slowly improving. When Emily mentioned the shiny stones, Mrs. Turner raised an eyebrow. "You found them in the soil?" she asked. Emily nodded. Mrs. Turner looked thoughtful and said, "The man who owned that land before you used to talk about strange rocks. He thought they were something special, but nobody believed him. People said he wasted years digging for nothing." Emily smiled politely and said, "Maybe he was just hopeful." She didn't want to think too deeply about it. To her, the stones were harmless and beautiful, nothing more. But Mrs. Turner's words stayed in her mind all the way home. Later that evening, Emily sat on the porch sorting through the stones. Some were rough, some smooth. She tried to remember if she had seen anything like them before. They didn't look like quartz and they didn't break easily. She tapped one gently with a hammer she found in the barn, and it stayed whole, only shining brighter where it had been struck. She decided to keep that one aside. That night, after Ben fell asleep, Emily sat near the window with her notebook. She wrote down the things that had happened during the week. Found more shiny stones. Soil seems richer near the old well. Garden growing faster than expected. She looked at the stones again and smiled. It felt silly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the land was giving her small gifts. A few days later, a small group of visitors came to the farm. They were two local men who delivered firewood. One of them noticed the row of shiny stones on the porch and asked, "Where did you get those?" Emily told him she found them in the soil. The man picked one up, turned it in the light, and whistled softly. "That looks like rough diamond ore," he said. His friend laughed and replied, "Sure it does, and I'm the King of England." They both chuckled and went on stacking the wood. Emily didn't take it seriously, but their words made her curious. That evening she searched through an old book she had found in the attic. It was a farming guide, but near the back, there was a chapter about minerals and stones found in different types of soil. She compared the pictures to what she had found. Some looked similar, but none were an exact match. She decided to take one of the stones to town the next week and ask someone who knew more. In the following days, Emily kept working as usual. She didn't want to lose focus on the repairs and planting. Still, every time her shovel struck the ground, she wondered what might lie beneath. The soil seemed endless, full of small surprises. Ben began collecting the stones in jars, sorting them by size. He placed them on the windowsill of his room so the morning light would shine through them. "They look like magic," he told his mother. Emily smiled and said, "They're our good luck." On the 7th morning after finding the first stone, the weather turned cloudy. The wind blew harder and the air felt heavy. Emily decided to stay inside and fix a loose window frame. While she worked, she heard Ben calling from outside. She rushed to the porch and saw him standing by the garden, holding something in both hands. "Mom, look," he said breathlessly. "This one is bigger." Emily took it from him carefully. The stone was almost the size of a walnut and caught the faint sunlight even through the clouds. It had rough edges but a clear shine deep inside. It was the most beautiful one yet. She washed it in the sink and held it up. For a moment it seemed to glow faintly, not like light from outside but from within itself. That night she placed the stone on the table beside her bed. She couldn't help but look at it again and again before turning off the lamp. Something about it made her feel both excited and calm. She didn't understand why, but she sensed that her life on this land was changing in a way she could not yet see. Outside, the wind moved gently through the fields, carrying the scent of rain. The old farm, once forgotten, seemed to hum quietly under the moonlight. Emily closed her eyes and dreamed of green fields, laughter, and the sound of earth turning under her hands. She had no idea that what she and Ben were calling pretty stones would soon rewrite their lives forever. The rain stopped after 3 long days, leaving the ground soft and shining under the sun. The farm smelled fresh and alive again. Puddles reflected the blue sky and small birds hopped across the wet grass. Emily stood by the porch holding a basket of laundry, watching Ben chase a butterfly near the barn. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, yet something about the land still felt mysterious. The shiny stones kept appearing in every patch of soil she touched. She had filled 2 jars already, each stone washed and neatly stacked on a shelf beside the kitchen window. Sometimes, when the morning light poured in, the stones sparkled so brightly that it looked like a field of stars had settled inside her little home. That morning, while Emily was hanging clothes on the line, a white truck stopped by the fence. A man stepped out, tall and kind-faced, carrying a small leather case. He waved and introduced himself. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Daniel Ross. I'm a geologist visiting from the city. I heard someone found some unusual stones near this area. I was wondering if I could take a look." Emily hesitated at first. She wasn't used to strangers stopping by, but there was something polite and professional about his voice, so she nodded and said, "You can come in. I might have what you're looking for." Inside the kitchen, she placed one of the jars on the table. Daniel leaned closer and gently picked up a few stones. He turned them in the light, studying them carefully. His expression changed from curiosity to deep concentration. He took a small magnifying glass from his pocket and examined the edges of each stone. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Finally, he looked up and asked, "Where did you find these?" Emily explained everything. How she had bought the farm for $400, how the soil was full of these strange sparkling rocks, and how her son loved collecting them. Daniel listened without interrupting, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said quietly, "Mrs. Parker, I think these might be something very rare." Emily blinked in surprise. "Rare? You mean valuable?" Daniel smiled slightly. "I can't say for sure yet, but these are not ordinary stones. They have crystal structures that look like diamond ore. The shape, the reflection, the texture, it all matches. This land might be sitting on a diamond deposit." Emily stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or believe him. That can't be true. Everyone said this place was worthless. The man at the office called it just dirt. Daniel closed his case carefully. Sometimes the richest places hide under what people ignore. "Would you mind if I took a small sample for testing? It will help confirm what these are." Emily nodded, still feeling unsure. "Go ahead. If it turns out to be what you say, that would be quite something." Daniel thanked her and walked outside to inspect the soil. He dug near the well, the garden, and the porch, taking small samples from each place. He was gentle, explaining what he was doing so Emily and Ben could understand. Ben watched with wide eyes, fascinated by all the tools and little bottles Daniel carried. When Daniel finished, he promised to return within a week with the results. Before leaving, he turned to Emily and said, "Don't tell too many people about this yet. Let's make sure first. Sometimes good news needs time to grow quietly." After he left, Emily stood on the porch holding Ben's hand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the field. For the first time since she bought the farm, she felt something different, an odd mix of excitement and worry. She looked at the soil and whispered, "What are you hiding under there?" The next few days moved slowly. Emily tried to stay busy, repairing the barn roof and tending to the vegetables, but her thoughts kept drifting to Daniel's words. What if it was true? What if their land really held something valuable? She didn't dare imagine what that might mean. On the 6th day, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel, written in neat handwriting. Inside was a short note and a folded report. The note read, "Emily, I confirmed my suspicion. The stones from your land are uncut diamonds in their natural form. The deposit is large and deep. You may be sitting on one of the richest finds in the region. I will visit again tomorrow to explain everything in person." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she read. She sat down at the kitchen table and read the words again and again. It didn't feel real. She called Ben from outside and showed him the letter. He looked at her with wide eyes and said, "Does that mean we're rich, Mom?" Emily smiled softly. "I don't know yet, Ben, but it means this land is special." The next morning, Daniel returned as promised. He brought maps, papers, and samples from a nearby laboratory. He spread them on the table, explaining each one carefully. "Your farm," he said, pointing to the map, "is sitting on a large vein of kimberlite rock. That's the type of rock that often carries diamonds. From the samples I tested, it's a high-quality deposit. This could be worth millions." Emily listened quietly, her heart racing. The number felt impossible to imagine. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel explained that the discovery needed to be reported to the state authorities for verification. Once confirmed, she could either sell the mining rights or partner with a company to develop the land. He assured her that everything would be legal and transparent. "You'll need a lawyer to help you understand the contracts," he said. "But make sure you stay calm. Many people will show interest once this becomes public." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about how a piece of land everyone called useless had changed everything. She thought of all the nights she had worried about rent and food, all the times she had felt small and unseen. Now that same soil might give her and Ben a new life. In the morning, she walked to the field with a cup of coffee. The ground looked the same as before, calm and ordinary. She knelt down, picked up a handful of dirt, and let it fall slowly through her fingers. The earth was warm from the rising sun. "You were never just dirt," she whispered. A few days later, officials arrived to inspect the property. They brought measuring tools and equipment to test the area. Daniel guided them across the land, explaining where he had found the samples. Emily stood by, feeling both nervous and proud. Ben followed them around, asking questions and collecting little stones along the way. By the end of the week, the officials confirmed Daniel's findings. They told Emily that her land held a diamond deposit that could be worth over $100 million. She could hardly breathe when she heard the number. She didn't dance or shout. She simply sat down on the porch steps and looked out over the fields. Daniel came over and said gently, "Congratulations, Emily, you found something extraordinary." She looked up at him and smiled faintly. "All I ever wanted was a home for my son. I guess the land wanted to give us more." He nodded. Sometimes the earth keeps its treasures for those who believe in it. That evening, Emily and Ben sat on the porch watching the sunset. The jars of stones beside them glowed with soft light. The wind moved through the fields, carrying the sound of crickets and the scent of wildflowers. Ben leaned against his mother and said, "You were right, Mom. It wasn't just dirt." Emily looked out at the land that had changed their lives and whispered, "No, Ben. It was never just dirt. It was a promise." The morning after the discovery was confirmed, Emily woke up to a new world. The soft quiet of the farm was replaced by the distant hum of cars and voices near the gate. News had spread faster than she could imagine. A few reporters had already arrived, asking questions and taking pictures of the old farmhouse that everyone once called worthless. Emily stood on the porch holding a cup of tea, unsure how to feel. The land that had once been silent and forgotten was now filled with noise. She could see people in the distance pointing cameras toward the field where Daniel had taken his samples. She turned to Ben, who was sitting on the steps watching with curious eyes. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said softly. Ben nodded. "I liked it better when it was just us." Daniel arrived a short time later in his white truck. He carried papers and folders, his face calm but focused. "I'm sorry about the crowd," he said kindly. "Word travels fast when something big is found. I'll help you handle this the right way." Emily invited him inside. The kitchen still smelled of bread and coffee. She offered him a cup and they sat at the table surrounded by maps and documents. Daniel explained that several companies had already contacted him, offering to buy the mining rights. Some wanted to dig immediately while others proposed long-term partnerships. He handed Emily a list of names and numbers. She stared at the paper, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't understand most of this," she admitted. "I just want to make sure Ben and I are safe." Daniel smiled reassuringly. "That's the most important thing. You'll need a good lawyer to read the contracts. I can recommend someone honest who will explain everything in simple words." Emily agreed. She knew nothing about business or legal matters, but she trusted Daniel's guidance. That afternoon, a lawyer named Mr. Harris came to the farm. He was a calm, patient man who spoke clearly and treated Emily with respect. Together, they went over every offer, every term, and every condition. After several hours of discussion, Emily made her decision. She would sell the mining rights to a company that promised to handle the work responsibly and restore the land afterward. In return, she would receive a fair share of the profits. The agreement guaranteed her ownership of the farmhouse and surrounding land, so she and Ben would never have to leave. When she signed the papers, she felt a wave of relief. The land that had once cost her $400 was now worth over $100 million. It was hard to believe, yet she didn't feel greedy or proud. She simply felt thankful. Over the next few weeks, the farm changed again. Trucks arrived carrying equipment, and workers began setting up a small mining site at the far edge of the property. They were careful to keep their distance from the house and the garden. Daniel visited often, overseeing the process and making sure everything stayed honest. Emily and Ben continued with their daily routines. She still baked bread, planted flowers, and tended to the chickens she had bought recently. Ben went to a nearby school and came home every afternoon with stories about his new friends. Their life had become busy, but it remained simple. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily sat on the porch reading a letter from the mining company. It contained her first payment. The number was so large that she read it twice before realizing it was real. Her hands shook slightly as she placed the paper down. For a moment she thought about all the years she had struggled, all the times she had counted coins at the end of the month. She smiled quietly, thinking of how far they had come, but not everything felt easy. With the money came attention. People from nearby towns wrote letters asking for help or donations. Reporters sent questions about her rags to riches story. Some even waited outside the gate hoping for an interview. Emily tried to stay kind but private. She didn't want to live as a headline. She wanted peace. One morning, Mrs. Turner came to visit again, carrying a basket of fresh bread. "You've become quite the talk of the town," she said warmly. "Everyone is proud of you." Emily blushed and replied, "I still feel like the same person. I just have more work to do now." They shared tea on the porch, watching the workers in the distance. A few days later, Daniel brought good news. "The mining has started carefully," he explained. "They found the first deep layer of stones. It's confirmed to be one of the richest deposits in the region. The government will recognize this place as a protected mining site. Your share will come regularly and everything will be transparent." Emily nodded gratefully. "I'm glad it's all being handled right. I want to make sure this land stays beautiful." Daniel smiled. "It will. You've turned something forgotten into something valuable. You gave it life again." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stepped outside and looked at the wide field stretching under the moonlight. The machines were quiet for the night and the air was calm. The land looked peaceful again, almost as if it was resting after sharing its secret. She walked slowly toward the old oak tree, the one Ben had always wanted to build a treehouse in. The ground beneath it felt warm and steady. She sat down, pressing her hand into the soil. "You gave us everything," she whispered. "I promise we'll take care of you." As months passed, the mining continued smoothly. The company built a small road leading to the site and provided regular updates. Emily's bank account grew, but she used the money wisely. She rebuilt the farmhouse with stronger walls and a new roof, added solar panels and planted fruit trees along the fence. She even opened a small community fund to help other struggling families in town repair their homes. People started calling her the woman who turned dirt into diamonds. It made her smile, but she always corrected them gently. The land was never just dirt, she said. It just needed someone to see its worth. Ben adjusted to their new life easily. He helped Emily around the farm, went to school, and often spent afternoons drawing the fields in his sketchbook. Sometimes he and Emily walked to the far hill where they could see the entire property. He would ask questions about the machines, and she would explain as much as she could. One day, as they stood on the hill watching the sunset, Ben asked, "Mom, will the diamonds ever run out?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe one day, yes. But even if they do, the land will still be ours. What matters is that we built a life here." He smiled and said, "Then we should plant more trees. That way the land will keep giving." Emily laughed softly. "That's a good idea, Ben. You have a kind heart." By the end of the year, the farmhouse looked completely new. The garden was full of flowers and a wooden swing hung from the old oak tree. The farm no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. Visitors who came for interviews often expected luxury, but found simplicity instead. Emily never changed who she was. She wore the same simple clothes, cooked the same meals, and kept her heart humble. Sometimes when she sat by the porch at night, she thought about how everything began. The memory of the town clerk's voice came back to her. "It's just dirt, Emily." She smiled softly at the thought. The same dirt had given her hope, home, and peace. The world around her had changed, but deep inside, she remained the same woman who once bought a broken farmhouse because she believed in a second chance. And though diamonds now shone beneath her feet, Emily knew that the real treasure was the quiet joy that filled her days, the laughter of her son, the song of the wind through the trees, and the steady heartbeat of the land that had once been forgotten. A full year had passed since Emily bought the farm. The seasons had turned slowly, painting the land with colors that told their own story. Spring brought soft green fields, summer filled them with light, and autumn laid golden leaves across the path that led to the house. Winter was quiet, gentle, and full of peace. Emily stood by the window one cold morning watching the mist roll over the fields. The mine was still active, but from this distance it looked small compared to the wide beauty of the land. She could hear faint sounds of work, but they no longer disturbed her. The hum of machines had become part of her life, blending with the sound of wind and birds. Ben ran down the stairs wearing his thick jacket. "Mom, can we go to the hill today?" he asked eagerly. Emily smiled and nodded. "Of course, but wear your gloves. It's cold out there." They packed a small basket with sandwiches and apple pie and 2 cups of hot cocoa. Emily wrapped a warm scarf around her neck, and together they stepped out into the morning light. The air was crisp and clean. As they walked toward the hill, Ben kicked through piles of dry leaves, laughing as they scattered around him. When they reached the top, Emily spread out a blanket, and they sat down together. From there they could see everything: the farmhouse, the garden, the silver roofs of the mining site, and the river that glimmered beyond the fields. Ben pointed toward the far edge of the land. "Do you think there are more diamonds there too?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Maybe, but I think the real treasure is what we already have." Ben tilted his head. "You mean the house?" She shook her head gently. "No, I mean our life here. The air we breathe, the home we built, and the time we share. That's the kind of treasure money can't buy." Ben smiled shyly and leaned against her shoulder. "I like our life too," he said. "It feels happy." For a while they sat quietly, watching the sunlight move across the fields. The land that had once been silent and forgotten now looked alive and proud. Emily thought about how everything had changed in a single year. She remembered the day she bought the farm for $400, the broken windows, the dusty floors, and the doubt in everyone's eyes. Now it was a place full of warmth, laughter, and meaning. When they returned home, Emily found a letter waiting on the porch. It was from the mining company. She opened it carefully and read that the first phase of mining was almost complete. The company wanted to build a small museum nearby to honor the discovery and name it after her family. Emily was touched. She had never wanted fame, but she liked the idea of sharing the story in a way that inspired others. That evening she called Daniel to discuss it. He was happy about the idea and promised to help her make sure the museum would also teach visitors about caring for the environment and protecting the land. In the months that followed, the museum was built near the entrance of the property. It was small but elegant, made of wood and glass, designed to blend with the surroundings. Inside there were photos of the land before and after the discovery, samples of uncut stones, and a display about the history of mining in the region. At the opening ceremony, many people from nearby towns came to visit. Reporters stood near the entrance and children ran across the lawn. Emily wore a simple dress and stood beside Ben as the mayor gave a short speech. When it was her turn to speak, she felt nervous but calm inside. She stepped forward and said, "This land gave me more than I could ever ask for. When I bought it, people thought it was useless, but I learned that nothing in this world is truly worthless. Sometimes all something needs is a bit of faith and care. This farm taught me that even the most forgotten places can shine again." The crowd applauded warmly. Some people had tears in their eyes. Ben smiled proudly beside her. After the ceremony, children gathered around to see the displays while adults congratulated Emily. She stayed humble and kind, thanking everyone who helped along the way. After the event, she walked through the museum quietly, stopping in front of a picture of the farmhouse as it looked when she first bought it. The roof was broken, the walls cracked, and the yard empty. She could hardly believe it was the same place. She whispered softly to herself, "We did it." The next morning, she woke up early and stepped outside with her cup of tea. The sky was painted pink and gold, and the cold air carried the scent of new grass. She looked at the land with deep affection. She no longer saw it as a mine or an investment. To her, it was home, filled with memories and lessons. Daniel visited later that day with good news. "The second phase of mining will begin soon," he said. They found another cluster of stones deeper underground. "It seems this land still has more secrets to share." Emily smiled. "It's amazing how much it holds, but I want to make sure we protect it too. Promise me that when it's all done, they will restore the fields." Daniel nodded. "That's already part of the plan. This will always remain your land, green and strong." After he left, Emily walked to the field and knelt down, running her fingers through the soft soil. The ground felt alive, full of warmth. She thought of the phrase that had followed her from the beginning. "It's just dirt, Emily." She smiled softly. It had never been just dirt. It had been a story waiting to be told, a dream waiting to wake. Years passed quietly. The mining slowed down and the company restored the land as promised. The fields turned green again, the river ran clear, and the oak tree by the house grew taller each year. Ben grew into a kind young man who loved learning about nature. He often said he wanted to study geology one day, to understand the earth that had changed their lives. Emily supported him in everything. She built a small study room for him in the house and filled it with books about rocks, soil, and the environment. Sometimes they would still walk to the hill together, carrying the same old blanket and basket. They would sit there for hours, talking about dreams and plans for the future. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ben turned to his mother and said, "Mom, you know what I think?" She smiled. "What do you think, Ben?" He said, "I think the land chose us. Maybe it waited for someone who would take care of it." Emily looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe you're right. Sometimes life gives us what we need when we least expect it." That night she stood on the porch looking up at the stars. The world around her was quiet again, just as it had been the first night she came to the farm. But this time the silence felt full, not of loneliness but of peace. She thought about how much had changed, how much she had learned. The diamonds had brought her money and comfort, but the real gift had been something deeper. The land had taught her patience, hope, and gratitude. It had shown her that beauty often hides beneath the surface, waiting for someone to believe in it. Emily took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't know if she was speaking to the land, the sky, or fate itself, but it didn't matter. Her heart was full, and that was enough. The farmhouse lights glowed warmly behind her as she turned to go inside. On the wall near the door hung a small wooden sign that Ben had made for her. It read, "Home of the woman who found diamonds in the dirt." Every time she passed by it, she smiled, not because of the diamonds, but because of the journey that had led her there, the courage to begin, the strength to endure, and the love that made everything worthwhile. The land had given her a treasure beyond price, and in return she gave it care, kindness, and respect. Together they had found something more valuable than any gem, the simple, lasting joy of belonging. And so the farm that once stood forgotten became a place of hope, reminding everyone who heard the story that sometimes the greatest treasures lie hidden beneath what others call ordinary.